tariffs yesterday are a big deal for auto workers in the industry. And you saw the United Auto Workers Union, Sean Fain, who wasn't the greatest fan of the president on the campaign trail, came out this morning and applauded the president for this move, saying it's a great thing for auto workers who have been sold out by unfair trade practices. So the president is determined to rebuild our manufacturing base. We want more jobs, more products made right here in the United States, which means more money in the pockets of the American people at the end of the day.
U.S. President Donald Trump set to slap fresh tariffs on cars and trucks coming into the U.S. starting on April 2nd. Its actual impact, though, on Canada at this point remains unclear. Industry, however, is warning, pending how those tariffs are applied, that they could increase the cost to manufacturers and consumers and potentially jeopardize auto jobs on both sides of the border. To craft a response, Mark Carney and key cabinet ministers took time off the campaign trail for an emergency meeting in Ottawa this morning. The Prime Minister opted not to announce retaliation until the tariffs are actually imposed.
Last night, the President of the United States reached out to schedule a call. I appreciate this opportunity to discuss how we can protect our workers and build our economies. We will respond forcefully. Nothing is off the table to defend our workers and our country.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre and NDP leader Jagmeet Singh also today asked at campaign stops about Canada's response. Take a listen to what they said.
I have a further message for President Trump. If you decide to go down this road, this is what's going to happen. Yes, you'll do damage to us in the short term, but we will fight back and we will build back. Within 4 years of a new, strong Conservative government, Canada will be completely rebuilt. We will rebuild our economy. We will not be reliant on the U.S. anymore.
We need to also make it very clear that if you want to sell vehicles in our country while this trade war is going on, then you have to have a footprint in our country. So we want jobs in our country. We have met with workers before. We're going to continue to meet with workers, and we're going to continue to amplify their voice.
With me now to talk more about the potential impact, Flavio Volpe is the president of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association of Canada. Brian Kingston is president and CEO of the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association. And Lana Payne is Unifor's national president. Hello to all three of you. Thanks for joining me. I certainly wish it, I was saying before we started to Brian, under different circumstances. Flavio, I'll start with you. I feel a bit confused. I know our viewers are by what the breadth of this is. Will we have exclusions? Will we not? What's the latest understanding you have of how this could impact the auto sector in Canada more widely?
Well, I had an understanding until about 15 minutes ago, and then I heard Howard Lutnick give a different understanding to Doug Ford. Up until 15 minutes ago, what we understood is we're going to see tariffs on every single car imported into the U.S. From whatever jurisdiction on April 3rd. For parts, they've deferred to May the 3rd while they figure out how to track American content within Canadian parts. We've also heard that any American content in Canadian-made vehicles might be exempt from that tariff, all of which is, I mean, just nuts. The latest, though, is the conversation publicly about, Lutnick called Ford, who's been a champion on this stuff, to say, let's bring the temperature down. And it might be that any Canadian vehicle that has more than 50% American content in it might be exempt. And Lana and Brian both know why I'm smiling, because I really don't know which car that is. But we've got 3 or 4 more business days before it happens. So he's either going to escalate or he's going to find an off-ramp. But it was prudent for the Prime Minister to say, and take our advice. I know that Brian and Lana talked to him as well, saying, don't fire back just yet.
Yeah, let me ask you, because that certainly stood out to me, Lana, as I listened to that press conference today. The fact that those counter tariffs were not immediately announced, that there will still be a meeting with the premiers. There is supposed to at some point be a conversation with President Trump. You were right next to Mark Carney when this, I think you were in a meeting actually when this executive order was signed. What was, if you can convey, whatever you feel comfortable with, what was your advice to him as far as how the feds react to this?
I mean, I'm not trusting Lutnick right now. I think none of us should take anything or everything he says with a grain of salt. The reality is he also told us to calm down 2 weeks ago. And here we were with an executive order yesterday on the auto industry. So we'll see what we're going to see from them. I think we have to be prepared for everything in this country. And what we saw in that executive order yesterday is going to be very damaging for the auto industry in Canada. Any tariffs are going to be damaging given the interconnectivity of the industry. And what I've said to Prime Minister Carney and pretty much any politician who's willing to listen is we have to be prepared in this country to do whatever we can. Everything has to be on the table to make sure that we're protecting every single Canadian job here. And that may mean doing things that are uncomfortable for automakers. It may mean all kinds of things, but we can't dismiss any of them.
Brian, I wanted to get your perspective as well on sort of what we heard so far and the response from the federal government, because as Flavio pointed out, the stakeholders of the industry were certainly saying, hey, hold your fire for now until these are imposed. Why is that the view that you took?
Yeah, we've been calling for a measured approach because we do think that there still is an opportunity to find some sort of off-ramp before these tariffs come into force. One of the notable things in this executive order is that U.S. parts and components will be exempt from the tariff. I'm seeing a recognition from the U.S. that we do have an integrated industry and that cutting Canada and Mexico out of the supply chain will be very damaging to the U.S. manufacturers. So I think we're gaining some traction on that. We obviously have more to do. I mean, the Americans send more vehicles to Canada than they do to China, Mexico, and Germany combined. We have huge amounts of U.S. content in the vehicles that we produce here, and the relationship is overwhelmingly beneficial to the United States. They have a trade surplus with Canada in automotive. So there are a lot of good reasons to keep this relationship going, and I think we need to be measured in our response and see if we can find some sort of accommodation before these tariffs come into force.
Flavio, I know that you've been on the horn with various cabinet ministers, people in the Ontario government who are involved in these conversations. You've laid out the facts that Brian has on a number of different occasions. Do you have any sense if they have punched through to any degree? Like, is there any internalization on the American side of the degree of interdependence that exists?
Yeah, look, in Canada, we speak math and science, and I think both levels of government and in both parties, everybody understands it. I just came back from Washington Monday, Tuesday with some congressional meetings. And while they acknowledge there's some math and science here, they always defer to the White House. And I think that there's a reluctance with leading Republicans to break with the White House. What we've been doing with them then is, look, I'm going to leave the math with you. So when you take a shot at Canada and you hurt Canadian auto parts suppliers, for example, there's 170 plants in 26 U.S. states with 47,500 employees that will be immediately imperiled. And try to leave with them an understanding that, just as Brian talked about interconnectivity, and Lana talked about how important the workers are in this whole space, you're not going to put Canadian workers at home and have workers in Michigan making parts or making cars, because they won't be getting any parts from us. Because just like when the Ambassador Bridge was blockaded in 2022 and when the pandemic hit, we all learned the lesson that you can't make the cars without all of the parts. And the president seems to get wind in his sails every time he gets some stakeholder who says, well, I'll soak it up, or the UAW president that says, I think it's a good idea. Well, none of those are going to be a good idea when 950,000 U.S. auto workers are not sitting at home wondering about prices of eggs. They're wondering whether they can pay the rent. And that'll come in weeks.
That leads me to a question about the, I guess, the companies or the people that employ Canadians here. The pressure is clearly Trump's objective, as he states it, Lana, is to force the industry out of Canada. And obviously, logistically, on a factual basis, it doesn't add up. There's a million examples of how negative that will be for Americans, too. But he keeps stating it over and over and over. Are you concerned about companies eventually facing so much pressure and so much financial pain that ultimately that is a decision they take?
Of course, because eventually they will have to make some concession to Trump to appease him, which is the biggest danger we face, that Canadian workers are squeezed by what is happening right here. And the reality is, I've said this very clearly from the beginning, we've had an auto industry in this country for well over 100 years, long before Donald Trump. We've had workers in this country building vehicles for a very long time. And the reason we do is because we had some guidelines around this. We said, if we have an auto industry, if you're going to sell in this country, we expect companies to build in this country. And we're going to have to get back to that, because the reality is we have to protect these jobs with whatever policy lever we use. And it means that, yeah, at some point, we have to say to automakers, we have to say to auto parts companies, we expect more of you here. We expect to keep this footprint. We expect to grow the industry, and there could be penalties if you decide that Canadian workers are going to be the pawns in which you appease Donald Trump. I know that's not what they're doing right now, but honestly, if Trump keeps the pressure on, this is the situation we could end up in. And the other problem is any tariff will lead to what is also a long-term risk. And the long-term risk is that we lose investment in Canada. And when we lose investment, we lose product, we lose plants, we lose jobs.
I'll give the last word on all of that to you, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is a risk, but I just, again, come back to the facts and the numbers. You cannot remove Canadian production and Mexican production from North America and put that in the United States without having massive negative economic implications for the U.S. consumer. We're talking about tens of billions of dollars to build new plants in the United States, and prices will go up dramatically for Americans. That is not a sustainable policy. Add into that the potential for a global trade war as other countries start to retaliate on the United States. This is bad for all involved. We've got lots of historical lessons of what happens when protectionist policies are pursued. No one wins.
All right, I got to leave it on that note. Thanks, everyone, for the discussion. I appreciate your perspectives tonight. Brian Kingston, Flavio Volpe, and Lana Payne.